from 1955 to 1976, was at his peak the most powerful, the most influential urban figure in America.
From the Cook County Democratic Party down to the precinct captains, it was a well-oiled machine, the Democratic political machine.
Chicago was known for a long, long time as one of the most segregated cities in America. What Daley did is not to challenge that on any level. And that was very important for him politically because so much of his base were extremely resistant to the idea of blacks moving into their neighborhoods. And Daley served their interests.
Now is the time to get rid of the slums and ghettos of Chicago. Now is the time. We must realize that there must be alliances now between Negroes and white people of goodwill. Get rid of poverty that engulfs so much of our nation.
I've been in many demonstrations all across the South, but I can say that I have never seen, even in Mississippi and Alabama, mobs as hostile and as hate-filled as I've seen in Chicago.
You feel you're in a close society, Dr. King, here in the Southwest side of Chicago?
Oh, yes. It's definitely a closed society, and we're going to make it an open society.
The white flight went to the suburbs to flee minorities coming into the communities. And Mayor Daley wanted to bring them back into the city. Urban renewal was a racist plan and supported by the federal government with funds.
I would hope that tomorrow every slum building in Chicago would be demolished and we'd have a decent home for every family. This is the aim of the present administration, and we're going to go through with it.
We were just talking on the street corner and at the bars about how the neighborhood was changing in that. And then we found out about a meeting at the Community Conservation Council. We walked in there was a model display. There's areas that are vacant, and these were Puerto Rican areas. And we saw nothing but 12 white men there directing the meeting, so we told them, no more meetings here, unless you have Black, Latino, and poor white representation on your council. And they looked at us like we were crazy. So to prove our point, we picked up chairs and started throwing them around, tore up all the plumbing, trashed the entire place. We shut down the Department of Urban Renewal for about 3 months. That was a victory.
I come from a people in the neighborhood that never worried about threats from anyone. As far as I'm concerned, there'll be law and order in this town as long as I'm mayor.
What were you doing when this rookie cop hit you?
I wasn't doing anything.
Police brutality. Police everywhere aggravating everybody. And just any reason to get us in that police station. And they had a bench with the handcuff on the side so they can cuff you and beat the shit out of you with a phone book or whatever they wanted to hit you with, as long as they didn't leave any marks.
They were free to do their own activities, whatever they want, you know, to treat people any way they wanted to treat them.
And we knew that we could either give up or we could fight. So we decided we'd fight.
You would get beat up before you even walked into jail. I just got beat up, you know, that was it. And I had to accept it. Who do I complain to?
When King was killed, all of us was affected. Rage, anger.
Shoot to kill any arsonist or anyone with a Molotov cocktail in their hand in Chicago.
Daley showed his power through the use of his police during the Democratic Convention in 1968. That was Daley.
No one lost their lives in Chicago. And all I did was what I thought was my duty under the Constitution, And under my oath of office, I've never tolerated brutality.
The Democratic Convention, we had seen the hippies being beat in Lincoln Park. We could relate to that. What was going on in the Vietnam War, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X being killed, our families being evicted from their homes, all that affected us and awakened us. The young ones started transforming themselves from a gang into a human rights movement. The mission was self-determination for Puerto Rico. That meant that we were powerful as a people, as a nation, to promote a sense of pride for being Puerto Rican. And we wanted neighborhood empowerment.
What we have to do now is pull ourselves together into a functioning group of people who can go out and rebel against that.
See, one of the things that's good about the young patriots is they're all interested in the problems they got here. You know, and they want to change them.
We're going to be patriotic to the community, not necessarily patriotic to the system. That's our way of being patriotic. If we're going to try to help our community, then we are patriots.
I'm the deputy chairman of the state of Illinois, Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton. We're not a racist organization because we understand that racism is an excuse used for capitalism. It's a byproduct of capitalism.
Fred was such a powerful speaker that, you know, once people heard Fred speak, they were just, you know, drawn. We want freedom. We want the power to determine our own destiny. That's the first point. We want true education, decent housing. We want people to have fair trials with a jury of their peers. We want an end to police brutality. Pretty much the same things that ring true now, unfortunately.
Everybody in the state of Illinois is going to have to be involved or even around the revolution because we're going to have one.
For all of us in the party, Fred Hampton was someone we all respected.
The Black Panther Party this time is a political self-defense, military, armed political unit. That's the definition of the Black Panther Party.
You could touch Fred. He was a servant leader, read a lot. And I was very impressed.
There's no educational program here? No.
Fred came to me as his field secretary.
He said, well, Lee, you handle the north side.
One day, Bob Lee said, hey, man, I want you to take a ride with me tonight. We got to go to this place called Uptown. I need you to be my security man.
They were poor, man. Well, I'm talking about slum. You could smell it. See, you could smell a slum.
We all went to this community meeting with the Join organization.
Panthers are here. Panthers are here. For Uptown. Okay. We come here with our hearts open. You got to supervise us where we can be of help to you. What do you want in your community? What do you want here? Are you afraid of pain? You want to take berets off now or what?
There were a lot of suspicions about the Black Panthers, that they were gun-carrying terrorists.
It was a scenario that I had never been in before. I see some guys with Confederate flag patches. I was a little concerned.
The thing we got to deal with is concept of poverty, man. We got to reach the color thing. See,
the building's not fit for dogs to live in, but humans having to pay $144 a month for the thing. They sell the building to new ownership. What we need is understanding among the people, coalition between the people to stick together and take them owners and put them over here in the lake somewhere.
Right on. Once you realize, man, that your house is funky with rats and roaches, you know, same way a black dude's house is, you know, once you realize that your brother's been brutalized by the cop, the same way the west side and south side is, you know, once you realize that you are paying taxes for the cops to whoop your ass, you're paying them, and you're paying them to kill you, and deal from there. The same things happen on the south side.
Bob Lee turned out to be quite an organizer. And he says, yeah, my name is Bobby Lee. but my real name is Robert E. Lee. And we all laughed. We said, you got to be kidding me.
Who's here that want to see this thing move? Right on. But the first thing we talk about now is how we're going to organize. You know, where are we going to organize?
And, you know, we're all going to get run out of here eventually.
That was a good meeting. It was. It got everybody riled up. It was a good start to a coalition.
We worked very, very hard in the Uptown community. It was 2 weeks. We went there every day, every night. Here's a white community asking for help from the Black Panther Party, man. I knew that this was serious.
We went to the 18th District Police Station as a community. We locked the doors, we pushed them to the side, and we spoke. So it was a non-violent takeover of the police workshop meeting. The very next day, it came out in the news, and that's when we met Fred Hampton. We were talking about how we can work together. Then they told us about the Young Patriots on the North Side.
We said that we would work with anybody and form coalition with anybody that has revolution on their mind.
We called a coalition meeting. To bring them all together. It came together, man. We all sit together. Boys, you look good, boy.
This here is the Rainbow Coalition button. And there's white, brown, yellow, red, and black. Didn't matter what color you wore this with pride.
The Rainbow Coalition was about uniting communities so that we can make revolutionary change.
Our communities were all struggling for the same cause. In unity, there was force.
Urban Southern whites with Puerto Ricans and blacks. I don't think there had ever been anything that substantial in any urban environment. What was going on in your neighborhood? The same thing was going on in my neighborhood, you know? And how are you going to change that? You ain't going to change it by hating the people in the other neighborhood. But the fastest way to change that was for those neighborhoods to come together. Housing issues, police brutality, just being fed up. That's what we could all agree on.
The Panther Party in Chicago, they're not only organizing the young lords, they're creating coalitions with another vanguard revolutionary group called the Young Patriots. Poor white people have begun to relate to the 10-point platform and program of the Black Panther Party. The young Appalachian white people.
That flag meant blood and murder. Who the fuck wanted to be around that flag, man? Let's be realistic now.
I just want to deal with black and black liberation. Everybody gets uptight when a few hunkies get their heads beat. What did they do when we was getting our heads beat?
So you got some Panthers couldn't handle it, man. They couldn't handle it. They left.
We always had the flag. We were brought up with the Confederate flag. And we were trying to confront people on their racism. You know, wear the flag with the Black Power or Free Huey, and it would spark up conversations. The contradiction makes people think. Fred Hampton understood what we were trying to do, and therefore he welcomed it into the Rainbow Coalition and allowed us to even go to rallies wearing that flag.
If you're going to organize with folks, you first respect their top value.
We started going around with him. He took us under his wing and basically helped us, you know, guided us.
We say to Pig, Daly, Hammerhead, Hannaran, Pig Collins, and the rest, no more brothers will be taken from us without cause.
Class consciousness cuts across all kinds of strata. For poor white people to be working with poor black people was unheard of.
black people and white poor people and red poor people and Puerto Rican poor people and Latin American Puerto Rican people of poor people of all descents. They had them caught up in movements based on racism when the Black Panther Party stood up and said that we don't care what anybody says. We're going to fight racism, not racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity.
This was during the peak of the Black Power era. The revolutionary struggle that we were envisioning was to eliminate racism. And in order to eliminate racism, you couldn't practice racism.
Came together as true brothers and sisters to stand up together.
The motto of the Black Panther Party was all power to all the people. Not all power to some of the people, all the people.
Come on in, little sisters. Y'all can sit down.
Children were going to school hungry, and there were no federal programs for that. And the Black Panther Party was the first group I saw that was talking about taking control of your own destiny. Instead of just asking people for something, it was like, okay, if our kids are starving, then let's give them breakfast.
We got the free breakfast program.
They showed us the importance of programs. We set up a free breakfast for children program, a free health clinic and dental clinic, a free clothing program, a food pantry, something that the government, Mayor Daley, was not doing.
We got the free health clinic.
We started working with the coalition and were able to get resources from that to set up a free health clinic.
We're feeding 3,000 to 4,000 every week already, and I don't know how many all around the country. We're out there every day and educating. People learn by example. I don't think anybody has an argument with that. And I think the Black Panther Party is doing that.
It was not a disciplined organization, but more of a symbolic mass movement that was trying to bring in more and more people into the coalition.
The idea of the Rainbow Coalition made a lot of sense to us, and we promoted that. We taught about Fred Hampton a lot.
These experiments were happening all over the country. In Chicago, there was another organization called Rising Up Angry. They organized all over Chicago. And there were rainbow coalitions, small r and small c rainbow coalitions all over the place that included groups like the American Indian Movement, like the Brown Berets.
As we worked together, we thought, well, we're really a lot stronger if we do this together. And it made us think that if we really want to change society, we all had to come together and support each other's struggles.
It just felt natural that you would struggle with other people who have been marginalized and who have been held down and who have been oppressed.
Whether you're from the South, North, East, or West, whether you're a Negro, hillbilly, or Yankee, we're going to stand here and fight together. Mr. Daley can take his money and his machine, his Uptown can take his money and his machine and go straight to H.E. you know where with it.
There's been trouble, and there's going to be more trouble. We're going to continue to have more trouble. You see, people are learning to struggle together. People are learning to fight together. And I don't think that's trouble, you know. I think that's self-defense, you know. I think we're defending ourselves, you know. I think the trouble has already come whenever removal came to this neighborhood.
The Black Panther, we're going to run this black community. We're not going
There
to
was this
compromise.
sense of solidarity internationally. These are communities who are struggling for very much of the same goals into oppression.
That we were connected to the world and uniting with all these struggles. That was the beauty of it. The world was on fire and we were part of that flame.
It appeared to me they wanted the white community to think that they could be violent if they had to on behalf of their people, so don't mess with our people. They were meant to scare the police, but it was turned against them. It played right into the hands of Daley to say, you see how these violent people are?
We're talking about revolution. People get hung on.
This was a complete challenge to the structure. You know, it wasn't saying let us in. That was not, you know, that was not the position of the Rainbow Coalition. We didn't want in, so he didn't have a handle on us.
very meeting that's been held in Thresholds Hall has been observed by the Red Squad and photographed because I've watched it. I want to know what the purpose of this is.
The Red Squad, they take your pictures just as these people are taking my picture here.
The Red Squad. Their purpose was to identify and observe and even arrest people that were considered to be communist or socialist or on the red side.
They tried to discredit us. You know, these guys are criminals, they're being arrested. So that's the image that people would get in the community.
Police department's gang intelligence unit. The unit that I was in formed a Panther squad. We were at this particular rally. Some kind of way the grumbling was, there's a lot of pigs in here, you know. So from the front of the room, Fred Hampton said, will the pigs please leave? So about 6 people got up and we all kind of eyeballed each other. We in there scattered out. Then we started to talk amongst ourselves what this mindset was and how threatening was it really to just everyday police work. And it wasn't. It was a threat to misconduct. It really was.
Counterintelligence program. It was spying on groups to disrupt forces that we found objectionable. That's what we did. The good word is neutralize. Black Panthers, you know, all these groups, they were the enemy. There was a mindset, we were going to lose the country. You know, it's us versus them. And we worked with the police, but we all generally thought the same way.
There's been a glorification of this gang structure, and that's why it's so serious today. Here's the state's attorney.
What about that? Rand was very tight with Mayor Daley. He was one of his cronies. He wanted to destroy us. He declared a war on gangs.
They are brutalizing their own neighbors.
They were not criminals, even though the Chicago Police Department lumped them together with street gangs. It allowed the police department to chase them as if they were gang members.
Reverend Johnson has made an offer about the person.
Reverend Bruce Johnson was the pastor of the church that became the headquarters of the Young Lords.
We do not consider it a youth gang. We consider it a viable community organization.
We began working immediately with the church.
We're already begun taking an application for children for the Children's Center.
Now the city of Chicago began attacking the Reverend like they were attacking the Young Lords. And they began fining him $200 a day every day that the Young Lords remained at the church. All we wanted was to get some help for our community.
In the gang intelligence unit, our unit, this is all gang crime stuff. They went in where the people were doing breakfast programs, busted eggs out of the refrigerator on the walls. They poured flour and bust eggs in the flour. They unnecessarily set back something that was a legitimate breakfast program. But that dry run, they were so frustrated because of who they were looking for was not there that day. And that was the day I decided that I didn't want to be in that unit anymore.
The reason why we haven't been able to open a daycare center is because the city has found ridiculous violations in the building, such as the floor is too low, the ceiling is too high.
They knew that we were going to begin to get a lot more support from the community. And the only way that they could stop us was by using bureaucracy.
I think that they should also look around in some of those apartments where the children will have to stay, you know, where they are getting lead poisoning, and not in a church where we are trying to take care of them.
It turned out to be a very powerful coalition. It was kind of making them look bad.
We hear constantly the attack on the establishment as though it is some invisible force that does nothing good for the community and for the country. I have no apology to make to anyone for our country.
To a great extent, I think Daley was simply unable to understand a lot of the societal changes at that time. Perplexed, frustrated, he fell back on repression.
This three-day conference may well be the turning point for what has up to this point been an increasing but loosely organized revolutionary phenomenon that will probably streamline and solidify what is now called the movement.
Now, we come from Chi-Town. We come from a monster. We come from a monster. And the jaws of the monster in Chicago are grinding up the flesh and spitting out the blood. The poor and oppressed people, blacks, South Side, West Side, and the browns on the North Side, the reds and the yellows, and yes, the whites. And we got together, the young lords and the young patriots, the Black Panther Party in Illinois, and we just said, now, what are we gonna do? We said, we're gonna intensify the struggle, motherfucker.
I was in the hole in double lock, which is where they usually put me into the jail. The warden of the jail came and he took me to his apartment and he put the TV on.
This being the first Sunday since the Reverend and Mrs. Bruce Johnson were murdered.
He was stabbed 17 times and his wife 9 times.
Because he wanted to work with the young lords.
I believe that's why he was killed.
We're praying that Henry leads the charge.
Before a raid, the police would hit the field, start arresting people. Your postman's face would change. You knew they were coming. I would be lying if I said that we wasn't afraid.
Fine, man, but I just wish they would come tonight. Yeah, well, I want them to come. I mean, who was that?
We had 2 attacks on officers.
It wasn't raid at this time. Who was attacked, man? You can look at the windows, man. Was there a fire in the? They set a fire after they got to him.
November, Spurs and Jake Winters got into a shootout on the South Side with police, and he shot 2 police who died, and they shot him about 1,000 times. So when you have those type of dilemmas going on, it's difficult to have not only an organization, but a coalition, you know.
The police were harder on us when we were political than we were in a gang. If we were in a gang, we would be picked up on a Friday, released Monday. When we were political, they were talking about life in jail.
I think that the issue here is that judges and the state's attorney have been working with the GIU and everyone else to try to suppress the Young Lords organization who are trying to speak out. You know, we're a poor organization.
I had 18 charges on me. They were all felonies.
For mob action and other demonstrations, basically lived at the courthouse. And so did Chairman Fred Hampton and some of the other leadership.
And why they want to get rid of me? Because I'm saying something that might wake up some other exploited people and some other oppressed people. And if all these people ever get together, then these pigs that are exploiting us, we'll be able to run them into the lake. That's why they want to get rid of us.
We went to jail together. They put us in the same hole to segregate us from the rest of the population. They were afraid that we would organize the rest of the jail population.
I'm out on an appeal for trumped up robbery, and we got around 9 people still locked up in jail. not a question of nonviolence or violence. The question is between resistance to this fascism or either non-existence within fascism.
COINTELPRO, one of the aspects of that program was to prevent the rise of what they call a messiah that could have the ability and charisma to bring together and to further empower groups.
We say all power to all people. We say white power to white people. Brown power to brown people. Yellow power to yellow people. Black power to black people. X power to those that we left out.
The 20-year-old chairman of the Illinois Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton, was shot and killed in a pre-dawn shootout with state's attorney's police in his West Side apartment. Another party member, 22-year-old Mark Clark of Peoria, also died in the shootout.
Chicago Police, COINTELPRO, Red Squad, they were all collectively responsible for the murder of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark and the wounding of others.
Chicago police took them out. If they didn't want you around, you weren't going to be around. And that's the way it worked back then. And it was scary. And I went home, got my gun out, and I sat there. And I sat there and waited. I didn't know what the next move was going to be. Nobody did.
When Fred Hampton was killed around 4 o'clock in the morning, they were calling us. That's when I found out about it. And we took a group to the apartment. People from all over the city came to be witnesses in case the police came back to remove any items.
Government couldn't make him and couldn't destroy him. They shot him and he multiplied.
I recall Jesse Jackson speaking.
More than we need more.
I tried to not show any emotion, act like a macho.
Fred, this is a good way to go.
When he finished, I just couldn't hold it anymore. I just went into tears.
A lot of people underestimated what the government would do to oppress a real, true poor people's movement.
And what did he do? He formed coalitions. That's what he did.
I am personally grieved over the death of Fred Hampton because he was a personal friend of mine. So it is that those who are symbolic of challenging America's injustice tend to have to die unless we make a real radical and revolutionary change in this society.
They sprayed this wall with 30 caliber machine gun fire. They shot people who were on the bed asleep.
The physical appearance of this apartment does not reveal any shooting out or reveal shooting in.
All indications to me, personally, that this was obviously a political assassination.
Ordered by
Who was there?
whom? Ordered by whom?
I have no idea. Who does the state's attorney get their orders from?
These bumbling police officers that carried that out, I don't even think they thought they were committing a crime. I think they thought they could get away with murdering people.
Witnesses who have seen the apartment say there is no evidence of bullets from the direction where the Panthers supposedly were to be.
I said that after our officers announced their purpose and their station several times, they were fired upon from within the room.
Hanrahan, a good Irishman like that, I'm on his side, regardless. My kind of guy, that was the thought. These are bad guys. They're after us, they're hoodlums, and they're fair game.
They knew exactly what they were doing. You know, they weren't killing Fred Hampton. You know, they were killing the whole movement.
people were confused. There was chaos. People didn't know which way to go. People began to turn on each other. And it forced us as an organization to completely go underground.
If Cha-Cha is underground, Fred dead, they created the Nexus. So it was a downtime, man. It was bad.
All of us had to go on our own separate ways. I had gone back to my hometown and had gotten harassed there. They considered me to be a communist. It always followed us around everywhere we were.
Everybody was losing contact. Everybody was spreading all over the country. A lot of areas were displaced, gentrified. So people had to move. So we lost contact for many years. Bit by bit, we were regaining some of the contacts back.
I talked to Bobby Lee. He was telling me that he just doesn't feel very good. He called me a couple of days and said he had cancer and that he was he's not going to take any chemo. And that's fine. I knew I had to come, here.
How you doing, Mr. Panther? Hey, brother. Peace to you, man. Yeah, you too. Man, it's good to see you.
Who would dream that you and I be together?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's Cha-Cha coming behind. Rainbow Coalition Part 2.
Mr. Robert E. Lee, sir.
All power to the people, man.
This is it. Oh, yeah.
How Fred would say it, you can kill a revolutionary, but you can't kill a revolution. And we're an example of that.
All power to the people.
These are the warriors. They in the room. You have white Panthers and you have Black Panthers.
You have Puerto Rican Panthers, too. They're just called Young Lords. They're just a subsidiary.
We didn't know that we were going to be lifelong friends, but we've ended up being lifelong friends.
We're leaving pretty soon. I just want to know, what do you want me and other people to remember?
Keep serving the people, man. If it's just 3 or 4 hours a day, you do something. Like my mom would say, save your own soul. Do something for life. And that's pretty much how simple it is, man.
He didn't really see skin color. He saw more of the people inside, the power that people could have to unite and to love each other. And that's what he wanted.
It was a display of violence that caused a state of emergency to be issued in Virginia.
Now, the same white nationalist group plans to hold 2 rallies right here in Middle Tennessee.
Must be the area that they're coming from over here. I think that's the checkpoint of the Nazis and the white supremacists up there.
We start the deportation. Now we start the deportation.
What democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Tell me what diversity looks like. This is what.
Young patriots in Chicago discontinued the use of the Confederate flag. We got into the Rainbow Coalition. We had to take a completely different look at the meaning of that flag. After a point, we thought there's no use for that flag here anymore. What that flag really stands for is hate.
On December 4th, 1972, I ended up turning myself in, which was the day Fred Hampton was killed. Intentionally turned myself in to let people know that the reason I was coming back was to continue our movement, the Rainbow Coalition. We didn't think that elections were going to give us revolution, but we saw it as a tool to continue to struggle. My campaign for alderman was used as an organizing vehicle for change. We did voter registration drives. That was the first time that many Latinos were voting.
Hanrahan, he was on the ballot to run for re-election. Members of the Rainbow Coalition circulated petitions asking for people to make a commitment of conscience to remember that he had been behind the murder of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark.
The entire Black community revolted and voted for a Republican state's attorney.
There's nothing I hate worse than defeat, Bob. But you can't roll over and cry.
That began a fracturing of the grip that the machine held on the community. It was the last of the big city machines to be cracked in any way.
When the curtain comes down, and it's bound to someday, I'll just say I did the best I could.
That concept of the Rainbow Coalition, it brought a lot of people together. The concept helped elect Harold Washington, mayor of Chicago.
Blacks, whites, Hispanics have joined hands to form a new democratic coalition.
The Rainbow Coalition, it presented a possibility. You know, it gave us a vision for what could be in terms of interracial politics.
Our flag is red, white, and blue, but our nation is rainbow. Red, yellow, brown, black, and white.
They are the members of what Jesse Jackson calls his Rainbow Coalition.
The idea of the rainbow, I think that was a beautiful, beautiful notion of repudiating racism, that groups could acknowledge their common problems despite the huge legacy of racial antagonism and racial hostility that existed in a place like Chicago. It's phenomenal.
I think that the time will come when the people themselves will take the power that belongs to them to their hands and move.
Racial profiling has to stop, Mr. Speaker. Just because someone wears a hoodie does not make them a hoodlum.
Barack Obama came to Chicago because he heard about the rainbow politics and Harold Washington.
I think at the time we had some romantic notion of what the revolution would be. Clearly that didn't happen, but that doesn't mean that we didn't revolutionize society. It's still in the psychic memory of people in Chicago. We still have the hope that we can come back together and fight to change things.
They didn't bait us. I don't want nobody to think that. They didn't bait us. We did what we set out to do. We made a better community.
The Rainbow Coalition gave voice to the voiceless, and their activism demonstrated that ordinary people can change society through collective action.
Today, many of the cities are facing the same issues of housing, of police brutality, of poor health care. The Rainbow Coalition is symbolic because we prove that it can work. Multi-ethnic people together fighting for a common cause.
You are listening to WLPN-LP Chicago, 105.5 FM.
You know, the whole concept of coalition politics is what propelled us to another level of consciousness.
Fred was saying, we didn't start the movement, we're not going to finish it. We're part of a protracted struggle that's going to continue
That's
on.
still going on.
And so we need to re-energize ourselves and continue to struggle and go forward.
Right on.
Bobby Lee, before he passed away, he told me If you don't know where to start organizing, you walk to your front door and you look in front of you, you look behind you, you look to the left, you look to the right, and then you pick a direction.
Brother Julian, can you hear us? This one is off. Can you hear us? 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 Really?
Brother Jaleel, Sister Rashida, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Assalamu alaikum.
Sounds like they can, but now we can't hear them because we muted. So, so I think that
what is the external audio?
You can choose what device they turn audio.
That makes sense.
Maybe we can just record this.
Well, what I was gonna say is, okay, so what's happening is our microphone pickup is feeding through that and it's playing it back out. Right. So I think the key is maybe that.
Is
Yeah. Trying to think how we.
Is this one muted?
That is muted.
Yeah, I can hear.
I'm just trying to think of how we get audio without picking us up.
Is there a way to choose the external audio? Like, you can sometimes choose what the input devices are.
The problem is, even if that's the input device, but we're unmuted, that will still play us.
Look at us.
Right?
Everyone
Because we're on the
helping.
call
There
together.
you go.
So, I think that the issue is like, this is broadcasting it like a, so like if you were on a Zoom, this would be like playing everybody's speaking except us.
Yes.
But in this case, it's picking us up because because of the way your screen is shared to this. I'm trying to think of how we did.
Maybe you can type the questions into the chat and then just do not use the microphone here. And just let them.
Or you could mute, or you could keyboard mute and unmute when you're on and off, so that our mic is always on, but we can mute this so that
So just let them talk and then just do the.
I think I'm gonna try unmuting our mic or muting the TV and unmuting when they're answering questions or chiming in so that everyone can hear it.
Sure.
Like, and then we'll mute our mic.
Yeah, as long as they're muted when you're speaking. Or you mute the TV when you're speaking.
So you all, can you raise your hand if you can hear us? Israel, Rashida, can you hear us?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, okay, they can hear us.
Okay.
So, well, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna mute and unmute the computer whenever you ask them a question. Is there a hand raising thing on this on StreamYard?
Sorry, guys, bear with us.
I think we can get started. You all can hear us right now, right?
Rashida, you can hear us?
Yeah. Raise her hand earlier.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, or not that well?
I can hear you very well.
Okay, great. So to hear her, Rashida, I'm gonna leave us and then you speak so that we can all hear you and get the volume right.
Hello? Are you able to hear me? Yes, okay, cool.
We had originally just planned to do this event in person, and then a couple of people asked to have the discussion online. So trying to accommodate that, and as you can see, there are a lot of wrinkles in the plan. Yeah. So thank you. So we're lucky to have with us, after we watched that really great documentary, 4 amazing speakers. The first is Brother Jadian Montafim. He is an activist, author, and former member of the Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army, and founder of the Jericho movement. It's really excited to have him with us here today. Rashida James Sadia, who is a dear friend of mine and also was one of the Muslim Narrative Power Fellows. She is also the director of the Muslim Power Building Project, a dedicated community resource training and capacity building space designed for new and emerging organizers. As an independent scholar and cultural organizer, she employs the art of storytelling to bridge the gap between memory, history, and pressing social issues of our time. Her scholarly and community-focused efforts are wide-ranging, encompassing sociology, social justice, religious studies as a means to confront and tackle gender inequality, urban displacement, carcerality, and systemic racism. Her ongoing project, Betraying the Spectacle, explores the constructs of race and the pivotal role of cultural memory, spirituality, and placemaking within the Black Muslim women community in the American South. Andrew Cuddy, who is now doubling as our tech expert, well, actually you are a tech expert in your full-time job, is an organizer and an active for the past 24 years in support of Palestinian rights and working on civil society initiatives among Palestinians. He's a member of Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network, a co-founder of DC for Palestine, a former U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights steering member, and a longtime member of Adala New York. Andrew has written for or appeared in publications including The Guardian, USA Today, The Forward, TRT, City Lab, the BBC, EI, and Mondoweiss. And last but certainly not least, Sami El-Qasim. I think you gave me a bio that was way too short. But Sami is a member of the DMV chapter of the Palestinian Youth Movement. So Fariha and I are going to ask our panelists a bunch of questions, and we will also send out a follow-up email because there is a study guide for this film that was created by Independent Lens to accompany the documentary in case you want to host discussions of your own. But we wanted to start, and maybe we can go with Brother Jalil, Rashida, Andrew, and then Sami, with our first question, which is, can you each tell us a little bit about your work and what community organizing means to you?
Sister Rashida.
Yes.
You can go first, sis. Answer that question.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, sis. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening to you all, and thank you so much for including me in this conversation. I would say at the heart of my work, or the heart of my work lies in supporting Muslim communities and emerging organizers through leadership trainings on advocacy, care networks, movement building, and the necessary task of unlearning power as a tool for harm and control, and reconsidering the responsibility of what it means to hold power and the importance of learning to redefine power as a shared strength and a collective resource that grows from care, mutual support, and collective action. And through this lens, for me, organizing becomes not just sort of the task of dismantling oppressive systems, but actively creating new ways of being in community with one another, where power is measured by our capacity to care, to heal, to transform society, but also to grow together as imperfect human beings.
Assalamu alaikum, peace, pause, barakatuh, jambo, ahrim. Haping, shalom, guten tag. Whatever is your native language, I speak to you in peace and solidarity. Yes. In terms of organizing, particularly in regards to community organizing, I think it's always important that our organizing is based upon the needs of the people, generally speaking. And as you well know what's going on with the federal government of this country, we need a lot more community organizing, what I generally call decolonization programs. We need to build our decolonization programs within the community, whereby, very similar to the survival programs of the Black Panther Party, we're fulfilling the needs of the community, right? Also, in this regards, we know that we're in a social order that criminalizes poverty, right? So in that understanding, it's extremely important that we organize the capacity from which we can build support for those who are in poverty, right, and in poverty and have been criminalized to the extent where they're sent into a system what is naturally, that since this country is a slave nation, what is in fact a penal slave system based upon the law. The law says it's a slave station, a slave system. And so therefore we should believe what the law says, because this is what is going on, where corporate investments are in the prison slave system, right? Reaping exorbitant profits of the labor of people who they have criminalized because of their poverty, which is created by the corporations system in and of itself. So we have a problem here in regards to what we consider to be our community and how we address the issues. And many of us sometimes don't address the issues in a direct way, in a way that really impacts what's going on in our community, particularly now in this system where we live under a government that now believes in genocide, practice genocide, and what kind of impact that's going to have on us. And so on the basis of that, I think it's important for us to understand what our community is, as Fred Hampton did when he brought forth the organizing of Rainbow Coalition. And as we know, in our history in struggle and resistance has been done with some of our even underground organizations. Those like for those who supported the liberation of Asala Shakur, right? They can also be representative of that kind of Rainbow Coalition in struggle, all right? So it goes a lot deeper in terms of how we address the needs of our community based upon the reality of the situation that we now are being governed by white supremacists, all right? And that we also understand that there's no longer democracy here. Democracy is gone, right? We live in a plutocracy, right? You got 13 billionaires in the cabinet of this government, 13 billionaires, all right? That's plutocracy. The rich rules, and we know that. Okay, so the oligarchs has now got this country, and all of us understand the system is based upon their idea of a white Christian nationalist government. We have problems here, and we need to address them straight up. It's going to be difficult for a whole lot of people, particularly Black people. We know that. And so for us, we have to understand what our community is on the basis of that understanding, the concrete reality that we are facing in this country, and impact it's going to have going forward. I hope I answered your question. That's what I think about community, community organizing.
Thank you so much for that, Julian. Andrew.
I guess I'll talk about this first, acknowledging that this film is really about a coalition that was built around the material realities of the folks who were actually in the coalition here, right? Like these were like the Young Lords, the Young Patriots, the Black Panthers. They are all dealing with the living conditions that they are actually living in, and their families and their friends and their neighbors are living in. I think a lot of the work that I've done historically, I just want to contextualize it. A lot of it, while I'm Palestinian and I've been working on the liberation of Palestine, a lot of it ended up, even when it was sort of intersectional or joint struggle, we were still in a mode of being in the United States and not being in Palestine, for example, when we were dealing with that. But some of the examples historically doing organizing, when I first started organizing, I remember the first sort of post-undergraduate work was with the Palestine Education Project, which actually had created a curriculum, sort of a Freirean curriculum that was like focused on explaining what was happening in Palestine in a way that was hands-on, right? That like younger folks could engage with. And we were doing, like we had a course at Bushwick Community High School, which was predominantly Black and brown, where we were there teaching. It was an accredited course, like Occupation 101, for example. And that was an instance of talking about the military occupation of Palestine in a way that also maybe gave some of the students language to articulate their own material conditions. And like the conversation that happened there, I would also say, was educational to the people who were the instructors, right? The people who came in to teach it. They were learning a lot from these young folks and the way that they were organizing and the way that they were thinking about things. And there were a number of instances like that with the Palestine Education Project. When I joined Adala in New York, which later became the New York Campaign for the Boycott of Israel, we were targeting an Israeli settlement builder who actually was violent, was gentrifying in New York City, was like violating human rights in Angola and in I think Namibia as well. So really out in diamond mines and hired security forces that were torturing people. And so we were actually working with Angolan activists there to, and we facilitated in almost a solidarity way because we were working with villages in Palestine and landowners there and farmers there. And then we were simultaneously working with the folks in Angola to try to make these connections, and so that they could actually bring that lens of the apartheid that was happening on the African continent into Palestine, so that during protests they would hold up signs that talked about it and targeted that settlement builder. And I'll jump to, like, right now in DC for Palestine, you know, I view this film to be largely about also the importance of community, which community doesn't always mean political alignment. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that. But, and acknowledging like Olivia, who's in the room here, Emily, some of the folks in our group, Dante, have helped to sort of create ward-based groups across DC, which some of y'all are probably a part of. And I think in facilitating a lot of that, like, that creates the communities and the community spaces that I hope bring people into conversation. At least when we started, I definitely heard those conversations of recognizing how disconnected some folks were from the system in DC and the way that it's functioning and the way it's treating people, versus the folks who have always known what the system is like, what council members are voting on, how they're trying to criminalize communities, and putting those two in conversation in a way that I hope builds community. And I think that is the foundation for then changing the material conditions. That's the foundation for actually changing, for doing the work to change what's going on, rather than just the transactional nature of saying, we have this political alignment, let's move forward, which doesn't build the kind of struggle, joint struggle that you see in this film. So yeah, so a little bit different in terms of examples, but hopefully helpful.
Yeah, so I'm a member of the Palestine movement. You probably hear at protests this phrase that we're a transnational, independent grassroots movement of Palestinian Arab youth dedicated to liberation of our homeland and people. So I want to break that down and explain exactly what that means. So we're transnational in that after the Nakba and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, our people were scattered across the world, and so we have to be transnational in that. We have chapters where our diaspora is on this continent, in Europe, and so forth. We're independent of that. We're not affiliated with or don't answer to any particular political party or faction. And we're grassroots in that we're not paid, we're all volunteers. We don't have any donor base that we have to answer to in terms of large donors, where if we lose this or that, we can't function as an organization. As far as like what that work looks like to liberate our homeland and people here in the DMV, it looks like things like direct actions, like protests that people go to, but it looks like a lot more things. It's really only a small part of it. It looks like political education things like reading groups, cultural programming like picnics. It looks like fundraising like for Gaza, for rebuilding Gaza, campaigns like the Back Stop Nurse campaign. It looks like building with mosques and churches, coalitions like with PSLM D2P, Shut Down Coalition, and building like with cross movements like with labor unions and things like that. As far as what does community organizing mean to me, I would say that it means you really have to be embedded in your community. Like me, for example, I live in Baltimore City. A lot of our community, Palestinians that are Muslims, they don't really live in Baltimore City. And so I have plans to move out of the city to be closer to some of the larger mosques, because it will help me be better embedded in the community to organize them. And it also is a function of not just place, but time. It just takes time to build relationships. Like you go to the mosque, you don't really go there to tell them, hey, I want to do this teaching with you. You go there and for years, honestly, just build relationships before you inject the politics. That's what it means to me.
Yeah. So before I ask the next question, I would like to share a little bit of my own experience. I come from 10 plus years of radical organizing in the city. So the reason why especially beautiful Maha wanted to make me bring this up is because when we talk about coalitions and coalition building, a lot of us organize in different ways. We come, have different perspectives on things. I am with Peace House DC, which is one of the longest-standing activist collectives in DC. Out of Peace House DC, a lot of other, things came out, like the East of the River Mutual Aid, like Migrant Mutual Aid, all kinds of things. I say this to say I'm always struggling with being sometimes in coalition with other people that see me as a threat as a radical organizer in the way I organize. So sometimes I find it really hard to stay in coalition whenever DC has a praxis in particular to creating coalitions whenever there's an urgency, because we come into these spaces and there's lots of almost like competing rather than, you know, working in coalition and staying in that coalition. So I say this to say, some of the lessons we've seen in the documentary, especially around coalition, what are the lessons that resonate with our panelists? And what ways do you think that the Rainbow Coalition was successful? That is also very important for me to understand and learn, because I would like to see coalitions to be more successful.
I'm gonna mute us and unmute for Rashida and Andrew.
Okay.
Are we okay volume-wise? Okay. Technology is out to get us. So I think one thing that's really important to me about the film is that although it focuses on Chicago, there were other rainbow coalitions sort of scattered throughout the US, to name California, Seattle, and those coalitions were sort of composed of different racial and ethnic communities that we don't see in this particular film. Something that we also don't see in this film, which does not mean that it did not exist, or sort of like how women were coming together within these coalitions to sort of like address their social and political position in society as well. But two lessons that deeply resonate with me are the power of deep listening in coalition building and the vital connection between, are you able to hear me? Okay, and the vital connection between theory and practice. I think deep listening is at the heart of effective organizing. It's how we build trust. It's how we build understanding and sincere relationships across communities. But second, something that really sort of resonated with me is that it's not enough to simply analyze what's wrong or to analyze our sort of condition and all the things that we're fighting against. And it also isn't enough to read all the social political books and to share our revolutionary ideas. Our visions at some point for the present and the future have to be tested. They have to be tested and explored in the real world. And we have to be prepared for challenges. We have to be prepared for success and the reality that we're going to make a lot of mistakes. And I think it's in the mistake making that we often learn our greatest wisdom and the capacity to sort of go back and try again. And so although I think there was a lot of success for the Rainbow Coalition, what feels really important for me in thinking about like our current political climate is their sort of capacity to be very deliberate in the thinking that justice needed to meet every community, that it had to reach every community, that freedom and safety and the opportunity to thrive needed to touch every single person, and their commitment to that vision. If I'm honest, I don't know how I could show up in space effectively with someone with the Confederate flag on their little denim jacket. I don't know how I would exist in that space. And I think part of that is also recognizing that there is no like perfect alignment in like how folks show up to do this work or their willingness to do the work or the history or experience that we bring with ourselves. But time and time again, there is this sort of like question around, are we able to like engage with the messiness that people bring and the messiness of our politics and what we're unlearning and what we say we're willing to do together. And I think part of that is acknowledging that it is going to be hard and that it is going to be challenging and that we will sort of like bump heads. And how do we get ourselves out of that? I think that sort of like consistently sort of this idea in the film of what are you willing to unlearn is the thing that came up for me the most. And I think just sort of thinking of the time and place in which we're in, we are constantly showing up with, again, our what we perceive to be revolutionary ideas, or how we may think that we are the first to ever do it, or the first to ever have this bright thought. We are not. But sometimes what we bring doesn't really like leave space for the wisdom and learned reality of the person next to you. And so like, what does it really mean to sort of like let go of the ego and to create space for these things or multiple things to exist at once to actually grow together? And so that, I think for me, the core is just like this aspect of deep listening, but also, are we willing to do this work knowing that we may fail and that we actually still have to get up and do it again, right? That success and victory is not only a possibility, but a reality. And stepping into that just sort of requires us to understand that it's going to be complicated. It's not a like if or when that shows up, but it's just a part of this. And what does it mean to really like embrace that as a part of this journey?
Alhamdulillah. That's beautiful, sis. I really appreciate you coming in with that understanding, that deep understanding, particularly when it comes to the issues of deep hearing and deep listening. Right? It's very important that we do so, that we listen to each other, particularly coming from our heart. Right? Listen to what comes from our heart. That's what's really important, because it's the heart. It's going to tell us our truths. It's going to bring forth our truth. But in regards to that as well, we understand that the struggle is the basis of resolving contradictions. And we have to recognize which are the principal contradictions and the primary contradictions. Right? The principal contradiction that we're living in a system that's based upon this aberrant idea of white supremacy. That's principal contradiction. Okay. And that all other peoples on the planet need to be subservient to that ideal. All right. And since we are in the, particularly here in this country, in the belly of this beast, this imperialist beast, right? And it is now has become fascist or turning even more overtly fascist, right? We have to really have the resolve into the world, right? Our need in regards to this struggle that we engaged in. So we're gonna have the brunt of fascist repression. All right. And so that is important for us to understand, right? And therefore, in this regard, we have to really begin the process of resolving those contradictions is based upon the indoctrination that we receive, particularly for Black people. We've been in a system of white supremacy for over 450 years, right? A traumatized people, right? And our process of untraumatizing ourselves has to be a process of liberating ourselves, all right? People need to know that. Right, and it's with that understanding we have to use every resource that's available to us because we know we're going to be targeted. Okay, and so for us, we were building what we call the People's Senate. We are in the process of building the People's Senate across this country. Right, because we have to create alternative systems of governing because this government is not working for us or in our best interest, and it never has and it never will. Yeah. And so for us, I would ask people to go to spiritofmandela.org/over to People's Senate, right, and log on, okay, and learn how we are trying to move forward, right, to survive the onslaught or their intent on genocides, right. And they're starting with the deportation of individuals who would actually be our allies, right, weakening our capacity to resist. All right, we have problems here, yeah, and we can't gloss over it. This is real, and the rest of the world is watching, looking at what's going on in this country. You had a guy put up a Nazi sign in the inaugural. They had put a known white supremacist as the Secretary of Defense. All right, they have another Proud Boy who's looking over the terrorist watch group, or whatever organization they got. All right, we know what they're doing. So that is the fight. That is the struggle. And we need to be truth tellers on this because it's serious. All right, so, and what the sister said in terms of our internal nature and our internal, yes, we've been indoctrinated. Right? Yes, we've been taught to be individualist and competitive. That's what capitalism is. Right? You take individualism out of capitalism, you don't have capitalism. You take competition out of capitalism, you don't have capitalism. All right? That's what we've been indoctrinated to believe. And yes, naturally, we'll bring some of that into our movement, some of those contradictions that we have not purged from our systems, from our indoctrination, from our colonized mentality. All right? And we have to work through those contradictions. Right? Because what's the opposite of individualism and competition? Cooperation and unity. We have to figure out ways to build greater cooperation. That's why we're building the People's Senate. So we had these kind of discussions across the country. All right. So please, if you do not learn anything from this webinar, right, understand this here. We understand the threat. Right? And we're trying to defend ourselves. And the only way we can do that is what Fred Hampton promoted. That's why he built the People's Senate, that Rainbow Coalition. All right. Now, in that same regard, let me make this point also explicitly clear. We have to be internationalists as well, because we understand that they genocide our brothers and sisters in Gaza, Palestine. They plan to take that territory. There's no ifs and buts about that. All right. And so, what do we have to do about it? We have to resist here. This is the belly of the beast. Like I give the analogy of the octopus. All right? An octopus is sucking the territory, sucking the resources from different countries. And every once in a while, an octopus tentacle gets cut off. Right? People free themselves. Right? Another one gets cut off. Right? Neocolonialism or colonialism. And the tentacle gets cut off. But it grows back. Why it grows back? Because no one has dealt with the head of the octopus. That's us. We're in the belly. We're in that head. That's imperialism. So, I mean, it's important for us to understand what the contradictions are, right? Know what the principal contradictions, white principal contradictions is capitalist system and white supremacy. Right? Look anywhere in the world, and you see where the black person is. They're downtrodden all over the world because the system of white supremacy. Right. And this is the reason why we have the problems that we have in Gaza. Right. With the Ashkenazis, if we know are Europeans, right, who converted to Judaism in the 6th century, 7th century, Europeans. You know, that settler colonial European thought. That's what's going on in Israel. It's European. We need to tell those truths so people understand what's really happening on this planet. Right? And we're supposed to be the vicegerents of the planet. Are we not? Muslims? The vicegerent? Isn't that a commandment? But if we don't take care of one another, right? You know, it disturbs me for many of us as Muslims, right? That we don't hear to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us. Right? That He made us into different names, nations, and tribes. Not so we have hate for one another, but so that we get to learn and know each other. That's Rainbow Coalition. That's what that is. Right? So we know each other. That's why we have hatred amongst each other. You see, so yeah, that's we building the People's Senate. Let's do that. Right? Let's find that. Let's rebuild that ideal. Right? Let's raise our common humanity. Can we do that? Assalamu alaikum.
And Sammy.
Do you want to repeat your thanks?
Yes.
No, I meant you said thank you. That wasn't. We
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't have a lot more to add. I think one thing I will just say is I think that one of the takeaways from the film for me was that we often let in our communities, like we let other people tell our stories for us. We let other people, we let like a very bourgeois media, we let random trolls and anonymous people on the internet and so many other folks tell our stories, tell us who we are, and we internalize that. And I feel like then we also internalize what is said about other people. And I think that so often is the barrier that's created between how we view one another. And I know in Palestine, actually, that's also an issue, right? You have the Israeli media that's talking to Palestinian citizens of Israel, telling them what to think about who they are, telling them what to call themselves, Israeli Arabs instead of Palestinian citizens of Israel, telling them what's happening in the West Bank in terms that actually they then absorb or internalize. You know, one time I was talking to a Palestinian Christian who lived in the town that I'm from, and you know, we were talking about their existence and the apartheid. And as we're talking about it, he kind of didn't even seem like I was talking through with him all the laws. And once we finished, he looked pretty shocked, but then said, well, where are we supposed to go? Should we go to Daesh, like ISIS in Syria? Like where should we go? And I pulled up an article of Benjamin Netanyahu saying that exact phrase and showed it to him and said, what you just said is exactly what Bibi Netanyahu said 2 years ago to the media. Exact quote, let them go to Daesh in Syria. And I was like, do you think there's any connection between what you just said to me and what was said 2 years before? And he looked shocked, honestly. He didn't seem like he knew that had been said. It had just come through the community, and that's how he heard it, right? And so he was otherizing people based on this, right? And otherizing Syrians based on this. And so I really think that so often, it's like the Brother Malcolm X, right? The quote where he says, essentially, like they'll have you thinking that the media will have you thinking, thinking, I forgot, it's like about who your enemy is, right? Essentially like thinking everybody else is your enemy. It really feels like that. And I think that that's often, you see so often in the film, they are telling each other their stories back and forth in a way that I think is actually really useful. And as they're telling each other their stories, like we talked, you know, Sister Rashida, you mentioned the Confederate flag, right? How did they overcome that? It was a conversation where they were talking about what that means to them, the Young Lords, the Panthers, talking about what it means to have that flag present and how it shows up for them, that I think compelled the Young Patriots to stop using it. Mm-hmm. But it took that humanizing moment. And I feel like so often that's people either don't have the patience for that, or they let somebody else tell them that narrative, right? They let somebody else tell them, this is why they do that. This is why this is happening, rather than them actually just meeting the person and saying, why are you doing this? We're in the same conditions. We're experiencing very similar things. You know, there might be differences, but largely our conditions are the same. Why do you choose to show up this way and like flex with essentially white supremacy, right? And the other thing I think that was a takeaway was just the way that they converted some of the street power into political power. It's never going to be one-to-one. That power is not going to show up the same way when it becomes political power. Obviously, like all due respect, Reverend Jackson did not show up the way that the Panthers did, but for sure the way that message came from the streets and made its way up to the presidential campaign. And I don't think that's insignificant. I do think, you know, I think Bobby Rush, I think Cha-Cha, I think others, they really changed what their message was as they became political. And I think that's inevitable. I think Eldridge Cleaver became a Republican, right? Like all kinds of stuff happened. But I think ultimately, like that political power is still significant. And it's important that that gets carried forward in order to show up in all spaces and challenge all spaces, not to allow people not to concede spaces to folks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll also add them intervening with the street gangs. That was really significant, I think, and made them uniquely successful in that people often talk about street gangs as rebels without a cause. So by intervening, I really felt like they prevented them from being picked up by the police for being involved in gang activity, and also from killing each other through like infighting. So what that really means is like they were able to protect their community from this common enemy of the police. and unite them and stop them from infighting. And then when they did the breakfast programs and the health programs, I really felt like that was in a way of providing steadfastness for them to continue doing the political work that they were doing as a community. Yeah.
So can you hear me?
Oh. Wait, you're unmuted. You want me to unmute them?
I just need them to hear my question.
Yeah, they can hear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have 2 more questions, and then we'll see if anyone in the audience has questions. But this is something that obviously really stood out in the film. You've heard it in the panelists' commentaries. But how do differences in ideologies, priorities, tactics among coalition members create challenges? And to what extent do our politics have to be aligned in order to build coalitions? I work within the Muslim space, and obviously there are a huge range of politics within the space. And a lot of times there is this sort of facade that we're all working towards the same goal when we're actually not working towards the same goal. So to what extent then do we have to, in times where there's an exponential increased onslaught of state violence, right? Is there something to be said about expediency? And then what do we do in terms of the long-term struggle of building coalitions where we are actually setting the foundation for the kind of politics that are inclusive and are just towards all communities? So again, Brother Jalil or Rashida, I guess Rashida, you're going to lead us in this.
Okay. I actually want to say something really quickly about what was shared. Again, sort of like about the Confederate flag. I do feel like it's really important, although folks were able to create a space where they could be honest about their perspective and relationship and experience with that flag. The decision to no longer use it didn't happen 2 days after that it was a process. And that folks sort of went through the messiness of that growth together, despite their discomfort, right? Despite their particular history with that. And I think that there's there's a lot to think about, and just sort of, for me, unpacking just that particular moment. I think when we're looking back at history, we pick the parts sometimes in which we get to lionize people and lionize movements, and not necessarily what it actually means to grow and learn and work with other individuals, and how complicated that is. Community, or being in community, or being in coalition is not perfect, because people are not. And so really owning that and having that to be sort of a part of your thinking in terms of organizing, I think is really important, because diversity of thought, experience, and approach, I think strengthens our movements. Although it can create tension, I think it's necessary. I don't want to be in a room where all people think alike, but I also know what is and what isn't my ministry. So as it pertains to American Muslim communities, I don't do well in places in which we can't be honest. At this point, we have to be honest that racism is an issue, both in the public square and inside of our religious spaces. That gender bias is an issue. That class hierarchies exist within our religious spaces, and a host of other things. And so if we can't be honest about the thing that's in front of us, I think it makes it really difficult for you to get to this place where you can actually do the work. So much needs to happen before you sort of get to that part. But I don't necessarily think we need to be in perfect alignment, but I do think that we need to come to a space where we're able to agree that we want to build genuine relationships. And I think that requires transparency, it requires honesty, it requires us having space to actually develop trust that allows us to sort of figure out what is the pathway for when we have conflict, or where there's harm, or when we need to make a collective decision. What is our sort of strategy around that? Just centering, or just thinking about Muslim communities, but I think that this can apply to anyone. We like to use that term Ummah a lot. And I don't think you can sort of be this united community without actually discussing what that means. And what that needs to be in 2025 perhaps looked very different 20 years ago. And I think that we really need to like sit in the complexity and the beauty of being with one another and actually saying like, what does it require of each of us to create community, to keep each other safe, to check in on folks, to think about the gaps in our community and to figure out like how to respond to them. When harm happens, how do we hold each other accountable with love, but still accountable? Like, how do we really sort of address these things that are like cycles within our community? There's so much happening outside that's impacting us, but the many ways in which we recreate those systems and carry those systems and continue to harm people, that part is on us. Like that work is on us. And so how do we ultimately like create these structures and like stay focused on our shared goals and our community needs, even when we don't like agree about the strategy or the framework? How do we stay focused on the thing that we're actually fighting for? And so much of that for me is like, we can have different views of how we get there, but I don't think that we can be in a space of actually doing the work if we're not being honest. And the last thing that I'll say, I don't know if we're clear on the threat or what the threat is. I think that we are existing in a space where for many, there is not actually a threat until it impacts you personally. And I think as long as we exist in that space as well, where allyship and solidarity is transactional or is temporary, there's a particular thing happens, and I'm thinking right now of like Black Lives Matter, and then like you have this sort of like rush of illusionary solidarity. And I say illusionary because at this point, especially as it pertains to the Black community, it requires our death. Like our death is required. It's deeply connected to you showing up. It's deeply connected to you hitting the streets. It's deeply connected to you supporting organizations. And at this point, if we are just to think about the murder of George Floyd, I'm always sort of processing, unfortunately, how much more graphic does the next murder need to be to sort of like ignite this response? And I feel the same way about Palestine. People have seen so much to the point where they don't look at it anymore, or they're numb, or you can look at death and also like look at some cats right after, or some sandwich that someone loves. And so I think the way that people have been responding is powerful and beautiful, but Palestinians were being killed before last year. Like, but before it became this sort of like global urgency. And I think as long as we're able to sort of like look away when it isn't us, or look away when it feels far away, or we wait until the last minute to say like, oh, look at how all these systems of oppression are connected, we're consistently going to be in a space where we're not protecting each other to the best of our capacity. I'm hoping that this is a moment for us to really like lean into that, not to all of the like sort of like fires that Trump is putting in front of us, but to really also lean into the craziness that exists, but also our failure, and I'm going to name it as a failure, to do the thing for a little while and then to like go back to our spaces. And then something happens and then we come back again, as opposed to really being able to sit in, we have not won this. And until we get to that place, and perhaps even then, we can't just keep turning and sort of like going back. We have to sit in this and actually really dismantle, come together and decide what we want to build and put that in place. But this sort of like temporary allyship or temporary anger or outrage or sadness even is not, it's not pushing us forward in any way, shape, or form. And we seem to be in a cycle of that.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, sis, for sharing that, because that's a fact. That is problematic. How we have not been able to really find some form of direction, some goals to attain on specific tangible issues that we have to address, right? Both on a local level as well on a national level. That's absolutely correct. And the work that we need to do internalizing our initiatives and our understanding of who we are, and what we can actually achieve, because we can't imagine it. If we can't imagine it, we're not going to make it to manifest. Okay, so we have to imagine the world that we want to live in, right? Particularly, let's say, a world without white supremacy. But is that imaginable? Is that possible? Right? And if it is, then what do we need to do to make that happen? To save not only ourselves, but to save the planet. Because they are destroying the planet as well. We know that, okay? So for us, it is important that we understand that, like we're trying to do, in regards to trying to build the People's Senate, right? Is galvanize an organization of all the organizations who are actually doing the work, so we can network with one another, right? Network with one another and hopefully be able to provide with resources amongst each other, right? Because they, as we already know, and particularly here in New York, they remove $86 billion from the New York Treasury federal funding. That's going to create widespread poverty, okay, in this country, right? Particularly, and this is what their so-called austerity program. What they're doing is taking from the poor and giving it to the rich. That's what they're doing. Like I said, we live in a plutocracy now, right? And so for us, it's important that we find the means and mechanisms for which we can build what you say, an organization that's based upon the real ideals of making tangible solutions to the problems that we're confronting, okay? Again, this is why we're building the People's Senate, all right? And so we have regional organizing going on right now, right, as part of the process. Okay, so it's important to understand that we some of us, and I say all of us, right, so we know we live in a system based upon class structure, right, and so there's individuals who, but if they do what it expected that I expect them to do, a major purging of Black people from high office, Black faces in high places, okay, if that's going to happen, they're going to be some very angry Black people, okay, and they're going to come to confront some real situations here that's going on in this country, right? And we have to figure some place, what are you going to do with these people? What's going to happen? Okay, we have to get organized, and this is why we are making this effort to create what we say is called a People's Senate, right? So we can begin to think about how we're going to really survive a system that is based upon being anti-Black, right? 100 million people voted for this guy, 100, right? Actually, 79 million people voted for him, and I think there's about 30 million in sympathy with this administration. That's 100 million people who are anti-Black across the board, okay? So we have to reach at least 50 million, right? At least 150 million, if at all possible, along with the rest of the world, okay, in order to survive this madness. So I really appreciate what you had to say, Sister Rashida, and I understand the nature of the movements that's going on in our support for Palestine. Let me say one other thing too about that. When our dear pastor, beloved brother Sekou Odinga escaped, right, and established the Algerian chapter of the Black Panther Party, right? He rolled with the PLO, right? He trained with the PLO. Okay, we've always had a major relationship, a working relationship with the Palestinian brothers and the entire movement. Okay, so it's not like when we understand the threat that we are facing. Okay, in regards to, because it's the same threat. It's the same threat made by the same people. Okay, so let's understand that. Yeah, we are in this thing together around the world, essentially. Right? You know what they're trying to do in Africa, right? Recolonize Africa, and the Sahel is preventing it in certain parts, and other African countries are recognizing this contradiction, right? But we cannot allow them to demean our humanity, right? Devalue our existence, and reduce us to a condition where they can continue to commit genocide. It's already been established by esteemed body international jurors, right, on October 25th of 2021. International esteemed jurors, the International Tribunal determined the United States are engaged in genocides against Black, brown, and indigenous people. Right? It's all on YouTube. Because because the corporate government was not going to let that information be out. If that had happened in China, that international esteemed body, international jurists found the Chinese committing genocides against the Uyghurs, been all over international news. All over the international news. China found guilty of genocide by international jurists, but not here. Right? Not here. Go look at the International Tribunal of 2021. Yeah, they've been found guilty. But keep this in mind. Keep this in mind as well, right? December 17, 1951, the great W.D. Du Bois, the great Marcus Garvey, the great William Patterson had originally filed charges against the United States in committing genocide against Black people. Right? In the speech of Other America, Martin Luther King stated that the United States was in the commission of committing genocides. Message to the Grassroots, El-Haj Melissa Bass stated that the United States was engaging in genocides. Right? It has to be across the board, wiping you out. Right? It can be this slow form, or in whole or in part. That's what the Genocide Convention states. And now they're committed to in whole. That's what's going on in Gaza right now. And you think they're going to stop, but we need to really start thinking about what's going on in this country, this imperialist country. Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
So we're just going to have Andrew and Sammy answer this last question, and then we'll close because I know it's getting late. And we'll send out information with the links that Brother Jalil shared, as well as the organization that Rashida is the executive director of, PYM's Information and DC for Palestine. So hand it over to you, Andrew.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just say, piggybacking on some of the comments Sister Rashida and Brother Jalil made, I think that we talk a lot about centering the folks who are most affected or most impacted in the work that we do. But I think that is very different than what you see in that film, which is actually those folks moving forward. And there is no question of the folks who are most impacted. There might be like tiers and levels of that within the groups, but ultimately, like, it's not the same conversation as so many of the ones that we have. And when you think about what was accomplished in the Rainbow Coalition, it's pretty incredible. When I think about, I think Sister Rashida said something about like how we have to recognize the condition, like the situation that we're in. And I do think it's true. Like, we don't all recognize it, or we all think it's at a different place, which is a whole different debate. When I think about the US versus, like, we don't have a lot of conversations. We don't do a lot of strategizing. There aren't a lot of spaces. When I think about Palestine, when you are in a women's union or you are in a trade union, your conversation is tied up in the liberation of Palestine. It's not just, hey, we're in this union and we're going to talk about labor and that's the entirety of our conversation. And I don't blame everyone for that. I think that's the reality of the capitalism that we live under, but it really makes a difference. And I think about Afeni Shakur, who was part of the Black Panther Party. I remember at one point defended herself and her peers in court without a law degree and like won. And I think about the way that was like just the idea that is community, right? Like, she was like, we don't trust someone else to make this case. We're not going to trust some public defender, and we're going to go. And she won the case, which was really astounding to me and made me think a lot about the ways that we choose to navigate things. I think the other piece that just gets lost a lot is like, I think people focus on trying to ensure that our politics are 100% aligned, and they try to distill every single bit of every single piece of somebody's politic to ensure that they're all aligned, which is truly never going to happen. I mean, that's very rarely going to happen in the spaces when you try to build coalition. And I'm no expert in coalition, but I can see that from the work I've done. But folks don't talk as much about what their theory of change is. They don't talk about, like, what do I think the problem is and what do I think the solution is going to be, or how do I think we're going to get there? And that goes back to the what are the conditions you're living in and who are you organizing with? Because I think it is a very different conversation. But nonetheless, I think it's a lesson for all of us also that we spend that time thinking about those things, thinking about who's impacted, thinking about what the problem is, and then thinking about how we want to change it. Because that allows us to then articulate that if we want to build coalition, right? When Fred Hampton in the film is being questioned and they're having the conversations, like you hear, and of course, as Sister Sheeta said, like there's a very limited perspective on what happened, but you hear him explaining it or talking through things with the young lords, with the patriots, the young patriots. So I just think that that is a missing piece oftentimes in how we think about doing the work that we're doing. And I'll hand it over to Sammy.
Yeah, so to your question about how do differences in ideology, priorities, or tactics among coalition members create challenges? So they do create challenges, but they create a lot of opportunities as well. So what do I mean by that? I mean, the PYM is an organization with like a very specific base. So we're a group of Palestinian Arab youth, and we are there to create a political home for ourselves, for Palestinian Arab youth, as well as to organize with our base Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims. We're just one organization, like a large ecosystem of different organizations. Like, there's work that we do that we just cannot fulfill that DC for Palestine is much better equipped and much better knowledgeable to fulfill. That's why we're here at the table. That's why we join tonight to join with others that can do work that maybe we're not equipped to do, for example. To the point of what extent do politics to be aligned in order to build coalitions? Really not much, honestly. So to give an example, part of that mass campaign that we have, we're going to the Port of Baltimore, and we're talking with dock workers from Dundalk. It's a working class white neighborhood. These are people that when you talk to them, if there's strikes, they are openly Trump supporters. We have very little common in terms of background, in terms of ideology. But you're not really necessarily there to align. You're there to, again, build unity with them around Maersk, for example, and what it's doing in terms of shipping military cargo to Israel, and what it's doing to their jobs with automation. And so, I still have to say is like, you really do need very little and many times to have political unity. And oftentimes, you don't even have to like the person you work with. I've worked with people that I don't like with, people that personally insulted me or that have offended me. But still, we're not there necessarily to be friends, but again, to achieve some common political goal. So I'll say that. Yeah.
Well, we can probably take like one question. Yeah. There we go.
Hey, I'm Chris. Nice to meet everybody here. Nice to be here. I kind of had like a two-part question, like for everybody on the panel. One of them was like, what do you think the pitfalls were that the Rainbow Coalition faced that could apply to organizing today, and how do we strategize around avoiding those? And another question was, when it comes to the international front, how do we build dual systems of power globally? And what strategies do you think we could take to combat roadblocks from our own country in interfering with?
Can you maybe unmute that and repeat that one more time?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I think it might be useful to actually
unmute this.
Sheila, Angelia, did you all hear that question? No, yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Not fully.
Okay. If sorry, if you can repeat it, and Sheila, Angelia, if you all can hear it, can you just raise your hand so you can make sure you hear the question?
We have just about like 5 more minutes, so we're gonna have to keep it brief, unfortunately.
So my question was a two-part question. It was what pitfalls do you think that the Rainbow Coalition faced that could apply to organizing today, and how do we strategize around avoiding those? And also, how do we like globally improve our dual systems of power and in our own country combat roadblocks that get in the way of that?
And if you want to respond, I'm gonna mute us and unmute you all so you can respond.
So, Brother Jalila, Rashida, do you both want to respond? Do you want to go?
Okay. I'm going to respond, I think, to the first half of the question. I think one thing that's really easy to miss in the film, because I did not go back to it, was the fact that, at least in that particular chapter, a lot of Panthers left, right? They were not comfortable the sort of like idea of the Rainbow Coalition, or particularly sort of like these like young white guys that were being brought in, and the Confederate flag, and a host of other things. And that decision isn't wrong or right. It's just what happened, right? And I think, to me, that's like connected to present day pitfalls, in the sense that folks who do this work, I think, often are very dishonest about the perceptions that we carry about the perceived other. I think there's a deep refusal to be honest, and this sort of illusion that your training, your academic pedigree, all the books that you've read somehow erase the fact that you have been existing in a country that is built upon harm and racism and oppression and gender bias and a host of other things. And, you know, the people that you're fighting don't know better, right? Or ignorant of these realities, but somehow, like, you know the thing. And I think it's just really important to name that there's a lot of undoing that has to happen. Do we have to work with people that we like? No. But I think the fact that we cannot seem, we seem to name the fact that consistently this divide and conquer tactic is used, but we can't seem to stay together. Like, we seem really clear. Like, if you look through all of the movements, like, that is the thing time and time again that comes up, right? That's the thing that we see in this film with violence and fear tactics, that everyone is scattered, right? For fear of losing their lives, right? Or what the consequence is going to be for doing this work. And although that is a part of it then and now, this sort of like idea that we can never change our hearts, we can never deal with the bias that we carry, but somehow we're going to like do this revolutionary work together, or we just have to do this part. Well, the thing is, when people don't actually change, people can undo policy. They can undo, you know, like we're living in that now, because like the fabric of the country hasn't shifted. It hasn't changed. And so I feel like the core thing for me, like as an organizer, is constantly trying to push people on, what are you willing to unlearn? And I think if we're not willing to unlearn anything, we have to know that that's going to consistently impact our frameworks and our strategy, what we believe is possible, how we're able to heal, how we're able to name that people actually can be in a room and hate each other, but decide that like today they're going to work together. Well, if the relationship is going to continue, we got to deal with that hate at a particular point. We can't keep like pretending that that thing isn't there. And so I think like the pitfall is like how we're consistently sort of put in a space where we so easily attack each other. We so easily leave each other. We so easily have these like acts of temporary support and solidarity. And what does it mean to once and for all just acknowledge that that is often the way that we are divided, and that we're not going to fall into that trap anymore. And again, I don't think that that's like hard. I don't think that that's like not hard or like not complicated, but I do feel that it's at the core of us really being able to do this work. And lastly, I will say, because I think it sort of showed at the end of the film, with brother Robert E. Lee, and sort of saying like, go outside your door, look to the left or the right, like basically find the work that you're supposed to do or meant to do in your community. As organizers, and I think also just leaning into like Muslim communities in particular, a lot of Muslims are doing social justice work beautifully and powerfully outside. They will not say those same things in the masjid. They will not say those same things at their dinner table with their family. They will not confront the people that they know intimately about the racism or the bias that they carry. And I think until we're like ready to face the people that we love the most, to disrupt the spaces in which we pray, we're going to just sort of keep finding ourselves in this cycle. The work is not just outside, it's in your house. And it's with the people that you speak with every day. And I think often that work is harder than sort of like addressing the people that you've already sort of like demarcated as ignorant or evil or like out to take your life. And be, like it's easier to do that work. We have to do the hard part. And I think like this is a moment, especially when we look at sort of like the voting statistics, it's time for us to do the hard stuff.
Again, Sister, well said. But it reminds me, mashallah, it reminds me of Jihad Akbar and Jihad Asghar, right? And big jihad is the jihad that you have to do within yourself, right? That you have to understand within yourself, your own divine nature, basically, all right? That is the real jihad, all right? The real struggle. But in terms of organization, with the answer to the person's question, or in terms of organizing, it is certain that you have to organize with your people. And in regards to what we're trying to do in terms of people-centered, you have to be anti-white supremacist, anti-fascist, anti-patriarchy, anti-racism, anti-capitalism, and imperialism, and have to be pro-national liberation of oppressed people, right? And those are the people that we want to unite with and ally with and collaborate with, right? And this is the way that we can find our people. But because you're going to find, and in the course of also doing that, we also know that there's going to be contradictions and struggles that we're going to have to resolve in the course of moving forward. But they have to have a foundation, a basis, right? And if you're not, naturally, if you're not anti-white supremacist, then what are we doing? If you ain't anti-imperialist, if you ain't anti-capitalist, right? You ain't anti-patriarchy, right? And you ain't pro-liberation, anti-fascist, and you ain't pro-liberation of independence of oppressed people, then what are we doing? You know? So yeah, that's what we're doing in terms of trying to build out the People's Senate, right? And we got to do that hard work, right? That Jihad Asghar, right? Jihad Akbar, right? Inside ourselves, right? And learn how to build, like again, as I said, our common humanity, right? And understanding for the most part, we are vice chancellors of the planet. And if we're going to be vice chancellor of the planet, we have to be our vice chancellor of the species on the planet, and that means us, human beings. Okay, that's the bottom line. I mean, it is that simple, all right? But knowing that we have an opposition, a force that is based upon genocide, pure evil, right? Satanic in many respects. If you really look at it, right? We have a job to do, right? And maybe I should not have said that, right? Satanic, right? That might be too harsh, right? But understand it is definitely evil when one group of people believe they're superior to any other people on the planet. That's, you know, that's just the Assalamu alaikum. Peace.
Okay. Yeah, I would just add one thing, which is I think we all hate the system we live in, and sometimes that materializes in how we organize, that materializes in how we treat one another, and like I feel like it's a forgotten thing that we don't realize it's showing up in those spaces. And also something we haven't talked about the entire evening is like movements get compromised. There are infiltrators. People build distrust as a result of that. I've been part of movements that have been compromised, and it's very hard to rebuild trust after you experience something like that because you're organizing in good faith and in full faith. So I want to give people that grace.
Yeah. No, I'll add is I second what Andrew just said about infiltration and security culture.
Well, thank you all so much for being with us today. Thank you, Brother Jalil. Thank you, Rashida. It was such an honor, a really robust, great discussion. Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. And Sammy as well. So thank you both for checking out here. Sammy's coming from Baltimore, and Andrew was our, tech person on the spot. So thank you, Andrew.
So successful.
Before we let you go, we just want to put another plug in for MCL. We plan to do these Counterpublic Cafes every month. We've been doing them since October when we launched. So we would really love if you could help support the work that we do. I'm just going to share a quick screen here, so bear with me.